I think we just have to, sorry.
Alice, at the moment it's saying that I can't share my screen.
Yeah, so I think I haven't been able to fix this, so I'm just going to make multiple participants can share, and then hopefully that'll get around that. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Oh, there we go. It looks like it's working now.
Oops. Oh, dear me. Diane Neville, you're Diane, you're right, Diane, sorry, I got to. Are you okay, John?
All good.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah. So we've got 2 minutes now. I could start letting people in. Or do you want to, or does everyone know what they're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm basically ready to go. Is somebody going to introduce us?
That'll be me, Dan.
Okay,
I'll do the introductions.
All right, lovely.
I'm going to ask participants to put any questions that they've got into the chat, and Alice is going to get those together, and then we'll go through them at the end.
All right, that sounds fine.
When we've concluded that part, we'll move on to Diane and repeat.
Oh, I see. So do questions after mine and then questions after Diane's. Okay.
I think it's easier. Otherwise, we get that far away from your presentation, Dan.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no worries. That's fine.
And Alice, just to check, you want me to hit the screen record button?
Yes, please.
Well, yeah.
So have I given you the ability to do that?
Yeah, I seem to be able to do that.
Yeah. It's not flashing yet, but
it's flashing on mine, if that helps.
Okay, we've got 13 people in the waiting room. So shall I let them all in now?
Go for it.
Yeah, just check. They're going to be muted.
Diana will probably already know this, but I'm a chair that very much likes to keep to time. So
oh. John, I can't hear you. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you're fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just double check. Diane, can you hear me okay?
No.
Diane, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I could. Yeah, no, I was. It says I was muted by the host, so I wasn't able to unmute. But yeah, there you go. I can hear you.
There we go. I'm ready.
Okay, well, it's a minute after 2, so I think we'll make a start. My name is John Reynolds, and I'm going to be your chair for this session on planning and how we can take action together inside the planning system to help to arrest the devastating consequences of climate change. I'm actually a former cabinet member for planning in Lancaster City Council, and latterly I did finance as well. Just a few notes for this meeting. So if you could please make sure that you keep your mute button on. We're quite happy to see your faces if you want to say hello. If you've got any questions as we go through, if you could please type them into the chat box, the Zoom chat box, and our colleague Alice will be collating those questions, and we'll go through them at the end of each section. Just a little bit of background on the planning part of it. So in January 2020, Lancaster City Council declared a climate emergency. At this stage, our local plan was relatively advanced, so much so that we were unable to bring it in for any kind of review at that stage. However, the new administration, which was elected in 2019, did decide that they would go to immediate review of the plan once it was passed. And to much delight, the local plan was passed in July 2020, and the council is now working through a review specifically aimed at the climate emergency that was declared. So this afternoon we've got 2 really good speakers for you to talk about the planning system. We've got Dan Stone, and we also have Diane Neville with us as well. Now we're going to go to Dan first, and just by way of introduction, if I can say that Dan is a chartered planner with 19 years of experience working for the Centre for Sustainable Energy. Dan leads the Low Carbon Neighbourhood Planning Project, advising groups on the integration of climate change adaptation and mitigation policies and sustainable energy in their plans, and was the lead author of the CSE's popular guidebook, Neighbourhood Planning in Climate Emergency. And is also an active advisor on local planning authorities on climate policies within their local plans through the CSC's Climate Emergency Support Programme. Dan has a long-standing interest in the potential of the planning system to contribute towards sustainable placemaking for the potential of neighbourhood plans to deliver informed consent from some changes needed to address climate change. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dan, and I hope you enjoy this section. As I say, please type any questions into the chat box. Thank you, Dan, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so yeah, as he said, I'm a town planner, chartered town planner working for the Centre for Sustainable Energy, but I've had a long career working mainly in local planning authorities prior to that. So CSE, we're a national energy charity working to sort of tackle climate change and fuel poverty, which broadly we see as being 2 sides of the same coin. And so today, mainly I'm going to talk about local plans, and I'm going to talk a bit about neighbourhood plans as well. So first of all, I really want to set the context for the relevance of planning to climate change. And just obviously in terms of climate legislation, we have the Climate Change Act brought in 2008, which then committed us to an 80% reduction in CO2 emissions by 2050. And Theresa May's last outgoing act pretty much was to upgrade that to full zero carbon by 2050. And this is a sort of graph from a couple of years ago, sort of showing our progress to that endeavour really. And so the Committee on Climate Change, an independent body set up by government to follow this through, sets 5 yearly carbon budgets. These are the sort of blue lines. And this graph shows our chances of achieving that. And I won't bore you with the detail, but just suffice to say, we're not on track to meet an 80% reduction in CO2 emissions at the moment, even less 100% emission reductions by 2050. And then talking about the kind of the relevance of planning, this graph sort of shows the sources of emission by sector. And you'll really see that kind of 3 of the top 4 sources of carbon emissions, that's here, are things that the planning system can do something about. So that's kind of power, electricity and heat, the transport sector, and also our buildings. And as you'll see from this graph, this shows how emissions from these sectors have changed over the last 12 years. And sort of overwhelmingly, emission reductions we've had are from the energy sector through renewable energy. Really, all the other sectors are pretty much flat. And so we've got a huge challenge ahead of us, and the planning system has a really massive role to play in that. It's also the only part of the kind of regulatory system which actually takes into account spatial aspects of decarbonisation and spatial aspects of climate adaptation as well, really. So talking about local plans, this is what local plan often looks like. It's a big fat document that your local council will develop, containing all of the planning policies that influence development within your area. And suffice to say, it's quite a centralized system in that it has to really closely follow national planning policy, the national planning policy framework, which is this document here. And then the kind of most important point I really want to get over in this talk really is about the carbon accounting duties in the legislation and guidance. And so this is the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act saying local plans must include policies designed to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And then this is from the NPPF saying, you know, the planning system should shape places in ways that contribute to radical reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in line with the objectives and provisions of the Climate Change Act. And obviously that talks about 100% reductions by 2050. So it's really quite a radical duty. And so there's all of the kind of major planning bodies agree that there is a legal duty on local authorities to sort of carbon audit their plans, but their plans basically. So they need to show how their policies are in line with the kind of carbon emission reduction targets set out in the Climate Change Act, include an understanding of baseline emissions, take into account the emissions inherent in future development. And basically, if they don't do that, local plans are really unsound. And really, once you've accepted that principle, and I've attached a link here with a briefing paper that sets all this out, it sets the basis for everything else that I'm talking about, for sort of renewable energy policies, energy efficiency policies. Everything else is required to deliver that objective, really. And so the first element is obviously zero carbon buildings and policies requiring development to be zero carbon, like this development in York. And this is an example of a policy from London that does that. And most policies have, they typically achieve that through a sort of combination of really high energy efficiency standards on buildings, requirements for those developments to be renewably heated, and requirements for the incorporation of renewable electricity. But we've spent the last year kind of reviewing about 12 or 13 plans, and of those only about a third, all from sort of big core authorities, have those binding zero carbon policies and standards. And then other policies require, other plans require renewable heating to be a part of new developments. And the best policies require new developments to actually be designed for that from the start and to show their workings. So this is an example from the London plan, which is, again, the best really. And this is the part of the policy that talks about showing your workings, basically. And it's basically saying many developers design schemes, and then when they're asked to sort of incorporate renewable district heating, they say, oh, sorry, we can't do that. It's because you didn't start out with that in mind. And then renewable electricity. So obviously core to the sort of decarbonation strategy of the government is decarbonising and then electrifying both heat provisions in buildings and transport, so electric vehicles, and obviously decarbonising electricity as well. And that means the Committee on Climate Change predict that would result in a fourfold increase in the amount of renewable energy that we have to sort of accommodate within our landscapes, basically. And so that means that local authorities really need to be very proactive in enabling and bringing forth renewable energy developments, basically. And an example of that is Stroud District Council policy. So here they're specifically quoting the climate emergency in their policy. They're starting to reconsider kind of weightings of landscape and the benefits of renewables as well. And only about a quarter of the plans that we assessed actually really did this. And then sort of talking about sustainable transport, there's a couple of really excellent policy documents that have come out this last year, really talking about a kind of a step change in the way that we sort of address sustainable transport, really lessening the kind of promoting a cut in car journeys and stressing the kind of importance of cycling and walking. But that's really not what we see in reality. This recent report shows that most developments that we actually see around us are sort of designed for cars and predicated on cars, often hung off a link road with kind of really token nods to walking and cycling. And so I think the kind of key principles arising for these documents that have come out is that local plans really need to be pursuing significant reductions in vehicles miles, reallocating road space to cycling and walking, allocating land, and requiring developments to be designed around an assumption that people will get there on foot or by bike, presumed access on foot or by bike, and really achieving a parity of provision between cycling and walking infrastructure and vehicular transport. So, why are we accepting this kind of infrastructure provision for sustainable transport? We wouldn't accept that for vehicular access and vehicular transport. And so anyway, we're sort of producing some resources to capture our best practice, and those will be coming out next year. Now, neighbourhood planning, we've got a 3-year programme that's coming to an end, giving advice on neighbourhood plans. And really, kind of neighbourhood plans, there's quite a lot of flexibility to address climate issues. There's these are the 3 sort of basic conditions that a neighbourhood plan has to comply with, but beyond that there is flexibility to address what you want. And so I think a neighbourhood plan that doesn't address climate change is not really worth the paper it's printed on. And so I'd encourage groups to sort of do a sort of fill the gap approach, look at what's in your local plan already and fill the gaps in that local plan, and also neighbourhood plans have a huge role to play in building the kind of informed consent that you need for the kind of radical changes we need. So that's including like renewable energy policies, retrofitting historic buildings, listed buildings like this, which are always going to be there by definition. And then including kind of policies requiring, encouraging energy efficiency standards, the incorporation of renewable energy within new developments, and addressing sustainable transport issues and service provision. And then biodiversity, and insisting on sort of net gain if your local plan doesn't already include that, a net gain in biodiversity, and sort of mapping biodiversity corridors and reinforcing them. And then we've got a whole slew of community engagement resources and workshops for neighbourhood planning groups, which are on our website. And then these are our publications for neighbourhood planning. So this is our central document, our guidebook. And then we've got a workshop for renewable energy, and a resource specifically about identifying sites for onshore wind, and then resources for checking your neighbourhood plan. And then that's it really. I've got 10 seconds to go, and then I can talk about the white paper in sort of questions that follow on really, but that's what I have to say. So I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, sorry about that slight delay, folks. Unfortunately, I was muted and unable to unmute myself. We do have quite a few questions for Dan. Thanks very much for that presentation, Dan. It was very interesting indeed. And I can see from the chat box that there are already some people who've benefited from the work that you've done. Just a few questions for you to address, if that's okay. So Andrew asked, obviously, more frequent flooding is occurring now. I think we've all experienced that wherever we live in the UK or indeed around the world. What barriers are there for local plans to do, given that the MPPF requirements, doesn't seem to address things like alleviating and managing storm waters? And if you want to take that one first, Dan. Alice, I think that Dan may also be muted, if you could unmute him.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, local plans in a way deal with flooding quite well, in that there's a kind of sequential test. So when you have development, you have to look at your authority and direct new development to areas that are in the lowest possible kind of flood zone and the lowest possible vulnerability. I think the trouble is, though, that if you're a local authority with a high housing number, and obviously the approach to sort of agreeing housing figures is changing, you could follow the sequential test and run out of sites that are kind of not vulnerable to flooding and have no choice but to still be developing land in flood zones, basically. But I think the kind of, nevertheless, the local planning system does approach that fairly well, and the Environment Agency is quite good in terms of kind of setting allowances for future flood risk and sort of addressing it in that way, if you see what I mean. But there are nevertheless limitations, and I fully accept that. I don't know whether that answered the question. There's quite a long pause between asking it and being unmuted.
Councillor Holroyd asked Dan if
Oh, yes.
If resources will be available before May. I think that's when their local plan comes in.
That's the objective. Yes, we hope so.
And Marilyn has asked that do neighbourhood plans in fact have any role, given that they are subject to regional and national planning policies?
Yeah, I think they do have a role. I mean, I think the most important role really is one of sort of driving greater ambition and actually sort of fostering that greater public acceptance of the changes that we actually need, because really the kind of carbon emission reductions we've already achieved is really the easy stuff. It's the dash for gas and sort of phasing out coal, and the renewable energy sites that we've already installed are the kind of easy ones. We need to quadruple that level of kind of installed renewable energy capacity, and for doing any of those changes and getting into people's houses and, you know, swapping out their gas boilers and swapping out petrol cars, and we need to do much better in terms of actually fostering and developing, you know, informed public consent of the need for those changes in the first place. And a neighbourhood plan is a really good way of doing that, and of kind of adding to kind of what a local authority is already doing, basically. So I very much feel there is a role. I think my question at the moment is, in the new planning system under the white paper, will there still be a role? I think there should be, but it remains to be seen whether there will be.
Thanks for that. Michael asked if his council would still be able to review the local plan, or if they've missed the boat. I mean, from my perspective as a former cabinet member for planning, my understanding is that councils can review their local plan at any stage with specific areas to look at.
That's absolutely right. I mean, he may be asking whether we could review their plan, because that's what I've been doing for local authorities, and I have spoken to Michael in the past. Basically, we've run out of resource to do that work for free, pretty much. But we would certainly be willing to sort of do it, but we'd have to charge for our time, and it's about 4 or 5 days of my time to kind of review a local plan. As I say, we've got these kind of resources that we're building up. I'm quite happy to share my kind of working file. It really is an untidy collection of policies with people if they want to see it, but it's just not polished as a document yet. But I'm happy to do that. I probably should send that out to individuals rather than spread it around the web more widely, because it's not fit to be published yet.
Thanks, Dan. And a question that I certainly got an awful lot when I was in planning, which was, how do we get round the awfully low minimum standards that are set by government? Well,
I absolutely agree. I mean, it's a real tragedy, because, you know, back in 2015 or 2016, we had a national zero carbon regime that was due to come in, and sort of industry was really gearing up to deliver on that. And then at the last minute, it was pulled. So that's 4 years ago now. And then in the interim, because nothing's happened from central government, local authorities have been really good at taking the baton on and developing their own zero carbon policies, and many have those policies in place now. But then now the government is again threatening to remove the right of local authorities to do that. They are gradually and steadily improving and increasing the standards within building regs, but that's not to achieve fully zero carbon requirements. So at the moment, there's going to be a sort of 30% increase beyond current building regs in terms of emissions this year, stepping up to I think it's an 85% reduction in carbon emissions by 2025. We think that's far too slow, and it's reliant on grid decarbonisation, you know, sort of taking the carbon out of grid electricity to achieve the full decarbonisation, basically. So I think at the moment, local authorities still have discretion to put in place policies stronger than the national standards, but that's being threatened to be removed.
There's a couple of questions there about sharing the presentation for today.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm sure we'll be doing that.
There's a great deal to go through. I'm sorry it was so quick, but I've sort of packed the slides with information so that people can look through the slides. You can always ring me up afterwards and just have any questions.
There's a couple of other questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to get to all of these, I don't think, folks. So I do apologise for that.
We do have 25 minutes after this if people want to stay behind. And
yeah, well, we can certainly pick up the questions after that are left in there. I think what I'll do now is invite Dan to review the questions in the chat for this part. And Dan, if you do have some time afterwards, it would be a real pleasure to hear your responses to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think what we'll do just now is go to Diane, if that's okay. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Really interesting session, and thanks for your participation there as well, folks. Some really great questions, and I look forward to hearing the answers to some of those from Dan in a little while. Waiting in the wings is Diane Neville. Diane is a Principal Planning Officer for Lancaster City Council and works within the Planning Policy and Housing Strategy team. Diane has been working as a town planner for over 15 years in both policy and development management. Diane is experienced of working in both urban and rural areas, having worked in Blackburn and Darwen, Ribble Valley, and of course, Lancaster. Diane is leading the review of Lancaster's local plan, which has been particularly focused on the climate emergency, which the council declared last year. So Diane, if I could hand over to you now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Just bear with me while I share. Can everybody see that okay? Yep, brilliant. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for staying with us after lunch this afternoon. I've I've listened into quite a few sessions and I found it a really useful day. So I'm sure lots of others of you have as well. As John said, my name is Diane Neville and I am a Principal Planning Officer at Lancaster City Council. So I work in the team that writes the local plan for the area and I'm leading the review work on this. So hopefully today I can give you a bit of a flavour of how we at Lancaster are using planning to tackle a climate emergency. So I won't speak for too long. I'm just going to run through what a local plan is and why here at Lancaster we're doing a review and what we mean by climate change and how we can tackle this. And then I'll quickly just run through the scope of Lancaster's plan review and the issues that we're looking at as part of this. So many of you will probably be aware what a local plan is, and Dan's given a flavour of this already. It's a statutory document that sets out where development will and won't take place over the next decade or so. And it's a document that contains all the policies against which applications are determined by our development management colleagues. So as I said, I work in policy. So today I'm just going to focus more on that side of things rather than the determination of planning applications and that process. But this slide hopefully gives you a bit of a picture of how plans link together, such as how the national policy forms part of the development plan for the district and how the plan has to be underpinned by a raft of evidence that covers a wide range of topics as well. So we're in a good position at the moment at Lancaster because the plan's bang up to date. We only adopted it on the 29th of July this year. However, you've probably picked up from some of the other sessions today, and John touched upon this earlier, the members at Lancaster City Council declared the climate emergency at the end of January 2019. And then they requested that the local plan was updated to reflect that position. So the now adopted local plan, adopted in July, it was too far advanced in its preparation to incorporate any further climate change amendments to the policies at the time. So members requested that we enter into an immediate review. So that's where we are now. The plan's going to focus purely on climate change. We won't be revisiting issues like housing numbers or allocations or greenbelt boundaries. We're only looking at how the policies in the plan can be amended or added to further reflect the climate change emergency. So I'll discuss this in more detail later on, but the timetable for the review is fast-paced and the scope of it is narrow. We're looking to only update a small number of policies, just over 30, which I'll come on to later. But this is actually one of the challenges of the review. Climate change is such a far-reaching issue that it can be difficult to pin down where policies can actually make a difference and what policies we should be addressing. But where we're at now, we're currently nearing the end of an 8-week scoping stage consultation. So it's like the first stage in the process. And that began at the end of September and it'll finish a week today. And as part of this, we are encouraging people to visit the website where there's a questionnaire to fill in and give views on policies that we've highlighted for change. So what do we mean by climate change? Well, the City Council have committed to reducing carbon emissions to zero by 2050 and have proposed to identify how its own activities can be made net zero by 2030. It's worth making a point at this stage that we in planning and housing strategy team are only looking at areas that planning can influence, but the council as an organisation are doing other initiatives to hit these targets. So for example, they are electrifying the entire refuse collection fleet, building solar farms to generate electricity, and they're also looking at agile working for staff to reduce travelling, although as you can imagine the COVID pandemic has slightly pushed that up on the agenda at the moment. So we in this review are only looking at the at planning and how that can influence things. So there's guidance on this in a number of places, such as the National Planning Policy Framework, the Environment Bill, and also Theresa May's statement that Dan mentioned earlier, where she made a legal commitment to end the UK's contribution to climate change by 2050. So these are just a few of the other plans and programmes and commitments out there, and all of this is being considered as part of the evidence for our review. So how can the local plan help to tackle climate change? Well, it can help with adapting to the impacts of climate change, making buildings and places more resilient, and ensuring that land use decisions are sustainable and consider carbon impacts, as well as making new development and district resilient and adaptable to change. It's also got a role to play in providing energy efficiency standards in both new and existing buildings to reduce energy consumption and fuel poverty. But there are difficulties around setting these standards at a local level while making sure we comply with the national position. This has been touched upon already, but you'll no doubt be aware, for instance, of the Future Home Standard consultation that ended earlier this year, and we're still awaiting feedback from central government on the direction that might take to avoid us doing a significant amount of potentially abortive work. The local plan can also take positive approaches to renewable and low carbon energy schemes such as solar, wind, tidal, biomass. It can do lots to promote sustainable modes of transport, walking, cycling, networks, as well as low emission vehicles and infrastructure. And this is something that our adopted local plan does tackle in detail already, with the addition of some adopted planning advisory notes on these matters, but we're looking to bring these even more up to date and detailed as part of the review. What the local plan can't do, however, is stop development from taking place entirely, which obviously many people would like to see it do in some areas. It's got to work under the remit of national policy and the soundness requirements, and also balance meeting the needs of future generations and the protection of the environment. So in terms of the scope of our review, I've touched upon this briefly already, but as I've said, the local plan is specifically related to climate change. I can't stress that enough. It's not a comprehensive review of the recently adopted plan, and it's not going to revisit every element of it. The last local plan took 8 years to complete, so we consider producing a new plan would involve significant time, and the climate emergency declaration makes clear that swift progress is needed in tackling climate change. So the focus of our review will be on core issues where the planning system can help to address it at the local level. And so as a starting point, we've identified the following issues and topic areas where we believe that planning's got a role to play. So perhaps one of the most significant ways that Lancaster district has experienced climate change is flooding. We've had some pretty serious flooding events here, such as Storm Desmond in December 2015 and again in November 2017, where many areas of the district were affected, and how the local plan seeks to manage water is going to be crucial. Whilst the adopted local plan does incorporate a SUDS mitigation hierarchy and ensures development takes place in areas that are less susceptible to flooding, we feel we can just further sharpen policy to recognise the multifunctional benefits that the sustainable urban drainage systems can provide. So by way of an example, a SUDS attenuation pond can not only act as both a storage basin for floodwater, but also potentially a new habitat for wildlife, also enhancing the visual amenity of the local landscape for residents. So this in turn provides opportunities to aid people's health and well-being. So there's quite a few knock-on indirect benefits that addressing climate change can actually produce. Transport is another area for consideration. We need to further recognise the need to alleviate our current reliance on the private car for getting around, and instead focus on making more sustainable modes of transport like walking and cycling, buses and trains, more accessible, more convenient, and therefore more likely to be seen as a realistic alternative to the private car. Promoting these measures won't only encourage more active lifestyles, but it'll also help to improve the quality of air along the district's busiest roads, so alleviating pressure along the key transport routes like the M6 that passes through the district. Also opening up capacity for more sustainable forms of transport like cycle and bus lanes. Lancaster's a predominantly rural district, so this means for many private modes of transport can't ultimately be replaced, but they can be improved. Measures such as the increased deployment of electric vehicle charging points across the district will help facilitate this transition to more sustainable modes of transport, and we're doing significant work on transport matters alongside the County Council, who are the highway authority for Lancaster. So in terms of housing and energy efficiency, well, the need for housing hasn't changed, so the issue isn't being addressed as part of this review. However, how we go about building homes has changed, and the way in which houses are built and ultimately run needs to be improved. Homes need to become more efficient, and the review are looking at energy efficiency standards, as I said, such as the Future Home Standards, which, you know, we're hoping to get feedback from central government on in the near future. And we also hope we also consider there's opportunity to explore micro renewables further and the benefits that they can bring to providing more sustainable electricity to heat our homes and businesses. And we're collecting evidence on this, which could potentially lead to a review of the areas considered suitable for wind energy generation that are currently contained in the adopted local plan. So turning to the natural environment, the local plans always sought to protect and enhance the natural environment. It's one of the district's most valuable assets. However, to promote a more joined up approach and how we go about this, we're currently working on a green and blue infrastructure strategy as one of our key pieces of evidence to support the review. Excuse me. Producing this, it's predominantly a map-based exercise with the aim to identify the existing network of green and blue infrastructure, and just acknowledging those multifunctional nature of many of these features. The purpose of the strategy is to identify opportunities where the network can be improved and enhanced, and increase the connectivity and functionality of the network, so ultimately to provide greater benefits for residents and nature. Some of the things that we'll be considering are the possibility of incorporating a decentralised heating system policy, and whether the opportunity exists for these to be included within larger developments in the district, such as the Balewood Garden village to the south of Lancaster, which you may have heard of. We're producing an area action plan for this area at the moment, so the timescales for these two projects are dovetailing really well. We've also got many historic buildings in Lancaster and the surrounding area, and we've got to be very sensitive to ensuring any climate change policies consider these, and that, for instance, repair work and renewable energy interventions don't negatively impact on the fabric of the buildings. Instead, we can look at the actual uses of the buildings and also ensure that non-disruptive interventions take place. And we're working closely with our conservation team on this issue, and they're providing really invaluable evidence-based work on this for us. So just moving on, I mentioned at the beginning we intend to update and amend a small number of policies, and there's 32 in total that we're proposing, and we've set these out in our scoping consultation material, and we are asking for views on these at the moment as to whether people agree or disagree with these and how you think we might amend them. These on the screen are the strategic policies. There's 13 of these, and they cover a range of topic areas from economic development and town centres through to environmental protection, as well as transport and modal shift considerations. And these are the development management policies, and there's 19 of these, and these cover issues such as housing standards, sustainable design principles and flood risk, as well as air quality, green infrastructure, renewables, health and wellbeing and transport considerations. So as I said, they're all set out in the scoping information that's available on our City Council website, and there's also a link on there to a document that sets out a summary of all of these policies and how we feel we might amend them. So next steps, the scoping consultation will end a week today on the 20th of November, and after this we're going to collate the responses, and combined with the evidence-based work I've discussed and some sustainability appraisal work, we'll work up a draft local plan, which we intend to publish in March or April next year. So the plan will effectively look like a track changes version of the current adopted plan, so it'll be really clear where the changes have been made and what they are. And then following some further consultation on this, we're looking to submit the plan in July 2021, and dependent on the planning inspectorate's timeframes, which are obviously out of our hand, we're anticipating examination to start just after that, so with adoption around summer 2022. So it's a very rapid production, plan production, as you can see. Hopefully that will give you a run through of why and what we're doing here at Lancaster, and how we're using planning policy to tackle climate change. If you want to get in touch, then these are the ways of doing so. And also just to mention, if you do want to be kept in touch with Lancaster's future work on the local plan review, then make sure you signed up to our planning policy consultation database through the website or the address on the slide, or just drop us an email. So thanks very much, and I'll hand you back to John.
Well, thank you very much for that whistle-stop tour of what's going on in Lancaster's review, Diane. It's much appreciated. This session does end at 1:45, but we do have up to 25 minutes after that to carry on the discussion if we wish. I'm going to do just 5 minutes now of questions for Diane. And then for those of you who are happy to do so, you're quite welcome to hang on. And if Diane and Dan are happy to, I'll put some more questions to them from the chat box, and we'll just see where we get to with those if everyone's happy to do so. So the first question, Diane, is about how ambitious the local plan review for Lancaster will be. And Andrew asks if it's going to be hailed as the most climate change compliant plan in the country.
Oh, that would be nice, wouldn't it? It's I think all I can say really is we're kind of doing what we can. You know, there are limitations when it comes to what planning can look at. As I said before, the remit of climate change is huge, but we have to be careful not to kind of get lost with ourselves really, and looking at coming back to issues that we've looked at before, like housing numbers and those kind of things. We've got to really focus it down and make sure that we're just looking at those policies that can actually make a difference. So it may seem that, you know, we've got these massive local plan and that 32 policies doesn't sound very much, but we kind of feel that they're the ones where we can actually kind of make some difference really. And yeah, like I said, we're doing all we can really. Like I say, it would be lovely if it is out there as a good one. I think we're slightly ahead of the curve in some areas, definitely within Lancashire at the moment with looking at climate change. I think it's something that everywhere is looking to start doing, but it's just fallen for us with the way that we've managed to get to adoption of our local plan recently, and with the declaration of the climate emergency, it's kind of just fallen quite nicely that we're able to just move on to that and feel like we can actually do something to make a difference on it before we then move into another full plan review, which, as I said, you know, can take a considerable amount of time.
Certainly did in Lancaster, Diane. Thanks for that. There's a question here from Anne who asks, how does a review of a local plan happen? Can local people ask for one to take place? I just wonder if you want to comment on the process there, Diane.
Yeah, I mean, the way it's worked here is that it's come directly from our members because of the climate emergency. But I would say in many ways that's probably come indirectly from residents, because, you know, that's filtered down through to making the actual declaration. We are very, very keen to get people's views on it, and what we should be including in the plan review. You know, that's why like I said, we're out for consultation at the moment, where we're saying, look, this is what we think, but you tell us whether we've got that right, because this is the time where residents or stakeholders, anyone can come forward and say, actually, I think you should be looking at this instead, or I'm not quite sure that you've got this bit right. So we're really keen to get people feeding into it. It is a process. It's an iterative process. We've got a plan production kind of process that we have to follow. It's set out in national kind of guidance, but that said, there is all these opportunities in there for local people to influence that, so they can give us their views. We take that away, and then we pull all that together, and then we will come back with like a plan that says, this is what we think you meant. Is this right? Do you agree? And there's another opportunity at that point to tell us again. So it's not just a case of us just saying, right, behind closed doors, we're going to write this, we're going to submit it, and there we go, that's what we're going to use. There's very much a kind of strong consultation element to it.
Yeah, and if I could just add there as well, I think that one of the things that the new administration probably should be most proud of is the public engagement that's taken place, not only on the climate emergency, but many other matters. So there's a huge role, particularly with a council like Lancaster's, for the public to play. Here's a good one for you, Diane. So this is about whether or not we can deliberately put much higher standards in, knowing that government may well challenge that. I wonder if you want to comment on that.
I assume when they're saying standards, they're talking about the energy efficiency standards. It's such a tricky one at the moment, and this is where the timing probably hasn't worked out that well for us here, because I said we're kind of that little bit further ahead at the moment, and we're still waiting on hearing back from central government on where things may go with that. We can put those standards in there. I think it's something that would be really keen to explore. It's just whether we then get to the point of kind of maybe submission or publication, and then the government say you can't do this, this is how it should be instead, and we then have to kind of pull it back. And as I said before, you know, there's quite a lot of the risk of abortive work there. So really hoping that we'll get something back from central government soon. I believe they'd said autumn was when they would feed back. Now, obviously, the world's changed a little bit in the last few months, so priorities have changed. But hopefully, we will hear something soon, and it will fall in nicely. But either way, it's something that we're looking at, and we're wanting to hear views on from people at the moment as to where people feel that we should be setting those standards.
Just one last quick one for you, Diane, which is about whether or not the council expects or did actually see a rush of planning applications before the submission and adoption of the local plan, and indeed whether or not you think you'll see one as the review comes up for adoption.
Don't quote me, but I don't think we did. As I say, I do work in the policy section, so we work together with development management, but I couldn't give you kind of facts and figures on numbers of applications and things. But because it's such a long process creating a local plan, it's developers and agents and applicants are very much aware of what the kind of direction that policy is taking, and although it can't have full weight until it's adopted, we can start to apply some level of kind of significant weight to it before the plan is actually adopted. So it's quite a kind of slow creep towards adoption rather than a right boom, this is the day, we're into the next plan now. So I think from that point of view, that's probably why you don't get that kind of that massive rush right at the end.
Thanks very much, Diane, and thanks very much, Dan, as well. So we've officially come to the end of the session. I'll just quickly check with my two speakers. Dan and Diane, are you happy to hang on a little bit longer? I can see Dan nodding away there. He perhaps just needs to be unmuted, Alice, if you could. Diane, are you happy to hang on a little bit longer?
Yeah. Yeah,
that's fantastic. Thanks so much for that. And again, participants, feel free to hang on as we go through the questions. They are really good ones. I hope we can get a chance to answer quite a few of them. So we'll go to a question for Dan first, and this is about steam turbine power generation and the role of that in planning. I wonder if you'd like to take that one.
Let me just find it.
So it's a question from Martin. Martin says, given that we are now moving away from steam power turbine generation, is the role for comprehensive planning of energy supply, since these seem to be prioritising cogen-based district heating?
Yes, yeah, there definitely is. I mean, first of all, there's a role for local authorities to be kind of, I suppose, shaping the forward developments that come through to make district heating actually work. So we've worked with lots of authorities where they've been kind of modelling the kind of heat density area by area across their authority to work out which are the areas where district heating would be economically viable, and then requiring district heating to be used in those areas. And then going beyond that, as I said in the kind of presentation, to sort of require developers to really show their workings that, you know, significant developments are actually shaped around having district heating in the first place, basically. And then in terms of kind of the other aspect of it, I'm not sure I fully understand the reference to steam turbine generation, but I would say there's definitely a role for the planning system to be involved in kind of, I suppose, grid planning and sort of that's the electricity grid, because that's hugely constrained in many parts of the country, and where it is constrained, it prevents new renewable energy projects kind of attaching to it, basically. And so there's a role for greater co-working between local authorities and distribution network operators. That's the people who look after the wires that supply energy, to make better use of the distribution grid that we already have, basically. So I don't know whether that's a full answer to the question, but that's the answer I can give. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks for that, Dan. We'll go now to a question from Josephine, and this was for Diane, I think. And this is about community engagement, the bit that we're just talking about at the end there. So Josephine asks, if you get a huge response from the community for you to support more radical plans to address the climate emergency, do you think this would be a sufficient supportive evidence base?
Absolutely, yeah. You know, we are in when we're producing a local plan, we have to. It gets inspected by an independent inspector, so we can't just just say, right, this is what we're doing and that's it. We're just going to carry on and ignore what everybody says. We've got to prove and show that that we've followed that process and we've taken views into account. Now, obviously, we can't take everybody's views into account, but you know, or mean that they shape the plan. But we do have to look at everything that everybody says. We have something called like soundness tests, so we've got to be able to show that they've been met. And if an inspector felt that we'd not done that, then they wouldn't find the plan sound and we wouldn't be able to adopt it, and effectively we'd have to go and start again. So nobody would want to risk that. We definitely do. It's not just a tick box exercise. We definitely do take people's views into account when we're working up the policies.
Diane, we'll go to another question, I think, which was probably focused at Dan. So how can neighbourhood plans, Dan, be more ambitious than local plans when developers say that it's unviable to build higher standards than the minimum set nationally?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's really very challenging in all honesty, because it's costly for local planning authorities to develop the evidence base to go behind, you know, to support very high energy efficiency standards for new development. And it's even more difficult for neighbourhood planning groups to do that. I mean, I think what I'd advise is that if you're a neighbourhood planning group that wants to do that, is build an evidence base that's resting on documents and evidence that's already been prepared by local authorities. So if you look around, you'll find many local authorities have already adopted policies with ambitious standards, and then they've probably got an evidence base behind it that looks at the impact of those standards on development viability, and you can use that and borrow that to support policies in your neighbourhood plan. But I think, also adding to what Diane was saying, I think there's a lot to be said about providing evidence on the community desire for these ambitious standards, and also statistics on the carbon emission progress the progress we've made to achieving the emission reductions that we need, because the Climate Change Act provides a legal commitment to reduce emissions by a certain date. We're not on track to achieve that. And so you can start to produce an evidence base saying, well, okay, what are the emissions in our local authority? How do those relate against the trajectory of cuts that we need to achieve? And if you can argue that they're not being achieved fast enough, then you can start to build a case for greater policies within your neighbourhood plan. And I've got I suppose, a template evidence base that I'd be happy to share. So I can't remember who asked the question, but if you send me an email or a message, I'm quite happy to share that with you.
Very much, Dan.
Yeah.
I'll just take a question now from Morris. Morris is asking about planning inspectors, and Diane, I think I'll send this one your way. So Morris asks, do you think that planning inspectors will support higher standards from councils? Morris, I think, maybe a member of a council or a resident, I'm not sure, but he says that officers in their council are nervous that they might not be able to defend those higher standards.
Yeah, it's difficult to say how planning inspectors are going to see it, really. You know, I think a lot will come down to the evidence base that sits behind it and how strong that is, and how much you can put into that as well. Like I said, without the government steer on it, it's difficult. And also, you know, I think Dan's touched on this. Developers will also always have the viability argument for everything, and obviously we have to do a viability assessment as part of the evidence for doing our local plan review to look at whether the policies we're putting forward are viable and they are implementable, and that obviously will be something that the planning inspectors would look at. But no, I can't give a yes or a no answer to that one. I'm afraid it's difficult. Like I said, I think it just depends on the evidence that sits behind it and the strength of that.
Diane,
would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, I'd really like to. I just wanted to make a comment about kind of viability, in that the kind of the policy context around viability has changed really markedly in the last couple of years. So it used to be the case that you'd have the council setting out its policies, and then a developer would submit a non-compliant application with a confidential viability assessment saying, oh, we're too pale, we can't afford to do this. And you couldn't even release it to the public. It was an outrage. And now that has changed. And so it's changed in that with the kind of new system, local planning authorities are actually expected to check the impact of all of their policies on viability at the plan making stage, basically. So they develop their policies, then test the impact of all of those on kind of, you know, the type of development and land values found around them. And basically they need to demonstrate that it doesn't make development unviable in their patch, basically. And from that point, planning applications are expected to be policy compliant, basically. And if they're not, you know, that they should be refused, basically. That's the kind of new position. And in exceptional circumstances, developers can put in viability reports to argue a different approach. But the government's very clear that the price they paid for the land in the first place is not a consideration. So if they paid too much for the land in the first place, and that's meaning that they can only do a scheme that's not compliant with policy, that's their problem, basically. So the situation has changed. It puts local authorities in a much stronger position, provided they go through that process at plan making stage, basically.
Dan. Alice, I see that Michael's got his hand raised. Would you like to unmute him and perhaps he can ask his question?
I've unmuted myself. You can hear me, I trust?
Okay. Yes, we can. Thank you, Michael.
Right. I'm going to say something which is perhaps quite challenging. David Hume, the Scottish Enlightenment philosopher, said, I'm probably misquoting him, all of our ideas are copied from our impressions. And I think what we've had in this session is planning issues from the perspective of planning officers that spend much of their time challenged by housing, new housing proposals. But I'm going to suggest to you that in terms of what we are tasked to do, this is very much at the margin. I'll cite from my own authority, which is High Peak. We're obliged in the next decade to put 3,500 new houses into a borough that has 43,000 dwellings. That's, in other words, an 8% increase in our stock. Even if they were zero carbon, and they're actually, I'm challenging something else, there is no such thing as a zero carbon house. But even if they were, you can see that their potential for reducing our CO2 emissions is very, very limited. In fact, every one of those new houses, if built to current standards, will have embodied carbon, i.e. associated with their combustion, of something like 50 tons of emission, and will emit from there on something between 2 and 4 tons per year. Now, this came home to me in 1990, when the firm that I was working with decided that they wanted to relocate their Preston office to a business park site, which is on the M55. Now, that would have allowed them to design a new, very highly efficient building, but it would have been entirely negative because their Preston office in the centre of town, fed by radial public transport routes with actually limited parking on the spot, would have immediately transformed the employees' relationship between home and work so that they were now going to be committed to a car. Nothing we could have done with the design of that building would have got anywhere near addressing the damage that we would have been done in terms of energy use and emissions by that move. Planning, it seems to me, has to focus on the relationship between relationships of where people live their lives, and fundamentally where they live and where they work. Those 3,500 houses in High Peak will provide more dormitories for people who will every day jam the M67 trying to get into their offices in central Manchester. Wrong houses in the wrong place for the wrong people.
Michael, so we're going to be closing at 3, but just very quickly, Dan or Diane, do you have any comment just to make on what Michael said there?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think this the planning system has a major role to play in kind of influencing the need to travel in the first place. And I think what's really interesting at the moment with COVID and the changes kind of in retail is I think we're going to have a kind of massive downscaling of our town centres and a kind of retail floor space everywhere. So, you know, I look at these kind of out of town retail sheds with car parks attached and thinking, well, we need to look at those first. We need to redevelop, get rid of those, keep our traditional town centres and start to kind of reimagine places around walking and cycling, and likewise look at, you know, over-engineered roundabouts and dual carriageways in urban, you know, in cities, in city context as well. So I absolutely agree about what was being said.
Any final thoughts, Diane?
No, I think Dan said it really. Yeah.
Well, thank you all very much for joining us for this session. It's been thoroughly enjoyable. Thank you very much to Dan for your insight, and to Diane for explaining the fantastic things that are happening at Lancaster City Council with the council's climate change review. I know that Dan and Diane will share the slides from today with Kevin and the other organisers, and make sure that those things are available to you. Contact details are there as well. So if you do want to carry on the planning conversation, the exciting planning conversation, and the role that planning can play in addressing climate change, then I would invite you all to do so. Thank you all very much for your time this afternoon, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Whoopsie. Hi, John.
Hi, you okay?
Yeah, I'm sorry about my inept hosting, but I'm.
No, don't worry. I mean, I think it was a really great session. I really enjoyed it. There's some really great questions there. It's such a shame we couldn't get a chance to go through all of them, but I feel like Dan and Diane will follow up with those participants on those questions. They're really good ones.
Yeah, no, they were. I'm looking forward to watching the recording so I can concentrate on it.
Now I've got a recording. What I'm just a little bit unsure about, Alice, is how to get that recording to you. I'm not sure about that.
I think you need to email Kevin about it, and he'll.
I'll make sure I've saved it, and then I'll get it sent on to.
I do have a copy of it. It's just that it won't be the speaker view. That's all, because I need to. You know, yours will be a better copy.
I'm just trying to see where do you get the copy of the recording?
I think it'll be on your hard disk, hard drive somewhere.
All right.
If you search for it, you'll find it.
That's fine. Okay, well, thanks very much. I'll bug out myself now.
Okay.
Thanks for your support with that.
Cheerio.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.